Deep in the heart of the Chicago Loop is a complex network of tunnels and overhead passages dating back to at least 1951, when the city envisioned providing travelers shelter from the brutal weather above. Even though the network was built and functions in modern times, knowledge of its existence is widely overlooked. This is the Chicago Pedway, an extensive network of underground tunnels, ground-level concourses, and bridges connecting various buildings throughout over 40 blocks of downtown Chicago. Well, the exact mileage of the Pedway isn't publicly documented or standardized. The Guardian said that its layout is more of a maze than a grid, estimated to constitute around 5 miles of passages. But how exactly did the Pedway come to be? Why didn't the city create an official map until 1980? And what will you discover by exploring Chicago's underworld? Stay tuned to find out, as today we discover the history of Chicago's Pedway. I'm your host, Ryan Socash, and you're watching It's History. Chicago in the 1950s was considerably different from the city we know it as today. At the crossroads of American rails and canals, its booming economic growth attracted people from across the world, resulting in a peak population of 3.6 million citizens. Meaning, back then, the city had nearly 1 million more citizens than it does now. Furthermore, the Windy City was highly centralized, as the majority of businesses and industry were geographically centered in a relatively small area, an area only made more crowded by city planners who were sure to make it accessible from far and wide. For context, Union Station opened in 1925, bringing in travelers from other parts of the state and beyond. The L served the greater city outskirts, and then Chicago's first subway opened in 1943 under Claiborne, Division, and State Street, followed by a second line under Dearborn Street in 1951. And it was that second subway line that ultimately gave birth to the concept of the Pedway. The idea was pushed forward by a man named Joseph Brimberg, a Polish native and student of accounting. His path to America was very turbulent. You see, when Germany invaded Poland during the Second World War, Joseph survived by convincing the Russian army officials to take him on as an accountant. In the meantime, his home had been set afire by Germans, and ultimately, his entire family was lost. After the war, Joseph married, moved to Chicago in 1951, and attended Northwestern University, before ultimately serving as chief financial officer of commercial retail specialists. And it was in this capacity that Joseph helped to develop the Chicago Pedway System in the process. Although I should clarify that there are two schools of thought on the topic. Some historians claim that the origins of the Pedway date all the way back to 1897, when architect Louis Sullivan designed an ornamental bridge from the Loop L to the Mayer department store at 1 South State Street, sparking controversy as the idea of direct access to shopping centers from public transit raised accusations and reasonable questions about potential nepotism. But the greater consensus would agree that the Chicago Pedway System wasn't initially part of a grand plan, but rather it evolved over time. Its development was more of an organic process rather than a preconceived, coordinated initiative, which is perhaps why the final result is so unintuitive and even unknown. With that in mind, the oldest section of the Pedway consists of the passage between State and Dearborn Street. These corridors connect the Transit Authority's Red Line and Blue Line stations at Washington and Lake Streets, as well as trains servicing Jackson Street. They were constructed alongside the subway system, and during the Second World War, the process didn't go smoothly, with the Blue Line section beneath Dearborn Street facing interruptions due to rationing. Nonetheless, the two mezzanine connector tunnels were opened, creating a link from the Red Line under State Street to the sidewalk of Dearborn Street. Construction has been opportunistic and ongoing since then, most notably expanding after the transit planning study, Chicago Central area in 1968, and then the introduction of the Chicago 21 Plan in 1973. Even so, the effort has always seemed to be something of a side thought, as navigating these tunnels is said to be difficult for locals and nearly impossible for tourists. One issue is that the nearly 50 entrances all look different and are only indicated by a subtle plaque featuring a compass. However, once inside, the maps are not always available. Then, in some cases, the tunnels re-emerge at street level, leaving commuters to basically hunt out the next entrance. One reporter from Curbed, who had explored the network, advised to simply follow paths such as escalators that lead down, and somewhat magically perhaps, once below, it's entirely possible to walk across the entire loop without ever needing to go outside. You'll also come across some magnificent sights along the way, sites such as artwork and historical exhibits, not to mention sections of the Pedway which are illuminated with modern lighting and design features. There's even an underground swimming pool offered by LA Fitness. Tunnels leading to City Hall will allow you to admire the building's vaulted cellar, which is ornate and stunning. From there, you can make your way to the city's culture center, where the so-called Golden Elevator will take you up from the tunnels below to the world's largest Tiffany Dome, which also happens to be the second commissioned by the Grand Army of the Republic when it was built all the way back in 1895. There's also an amazing stained glass collection on the basement floor of Macy's. All of this is the type of contrast I love so much about Chicago culture. Tunnels, which are created for the common worker, can lead you to places architecturally fit for royalty. But don't get me wrong, the Pedway has something for every Chicagoan. There's also contemporary art, such as a mural by the students of the Art Institute dedicated to Chance the Rapper, yet another Chicago local who became a global celebrity. However, if we have a look at some of the entrances, like those in the vicinity of Millennium Station, we'll find that the network also has its more gritty side. Some of the decorations are comically bad, with brown bulge that lines beige walls in the vicinity of the Illinois Center. These concerns are not unfounded, as the division of responsibility between private owners and the city has made it unclear as to who's responsible for security. Other issues are caused by access, as passages run through many privately owned buildings. Every owner is entitled to declare their own opening hours, gating off the Pedway entirely when they're closed. Some businesses might elect to leave their passage open all night, whereas others revoke access in the early evening. Finally, the Pedway is not handicapped friendly, making the city hesitant to invest in the system, as they do not have authority to force private buildings to comply with the Federal Americans with Disabilities Act, unless they are doing some remodeling already. And hence, it's here that the reality conflicts with concept, to the point that the creation of a massive underground pedestrian walkway network in Chicago might simply be impossible. There is something very special about underground tunnel networks, and Chicago has had a very long history of utilizing them in unprecedented ways. Although the complications arising from the mix of the Pedway system between private and public owners makes progress seem impossible, I'm reminded of the lost freight tunnel system from the turn of the 20th century, a case where a private company managed to construct and operate a network of tunnels over 60 miles long, despite some very similar complications. Those tunnels were also connected to both private and public spaces, and have proven to be quite useful, even after they were abandoned, as these days they serve as a wonderful place to run phone cables and power lines. I'd also say that it's assuring that Chicago isn't giving up on the Pedway concept just yet, as nonprofits and the city alike have put forth proposals to improve navigation with comprehensive signage and encourage the public to explore the system by establishing the space as a center of art and culture. So perhaps Chicago will prevail. I know I'm keeping my fingers crossed. Thank you all for watching, and until next time, I'm Ryan Socash, signing off.